Well, hey everybody, happy Mother's Day to you. Ladies, I hope you're well celebrated today and know that you're loved and appreciated and treasured. You know, this is the second Mother's Day that's come since my mother passed early last year, January of last year. And I found myself thinking, kind of longing to know what she would have said last weekend. Now, last weekend, the first weekend of May, was a terrific week here at CCC. It was Ask a Counselor Sunday, as we had a professional Christian counselor, Nick Cox. He was with us and he was blasting through some questions you all sent in over the last month and some frequently asked questions in light of this past year. It was a great week. And if you missed it, you ought to go back and listen to it or watch it. But I wasn't here. I was out of town. I was at my oldest son, Daniel's college graduation from Milligan University in Tennessee. His graduation, it was held outside at Cardinal Park in Johnson City, Tennessee, where the Johnson City Cardinals played minor league baseball. It was a pretty straightforward ceremony, social distance style and all. But afterwards, we hosted a little lunch at a local barbecue place there in Johnson City. It was called the Firehouse. And they had a separate room for us where some of my family and some friends of Daniel's, along with some family friends, folks who had known us and known Daniel since he was born, essentially. And there was a time where my father worded a prayer for Daniel, and then we spent some time around the tables sharing some favorite Daniel stories and articulating what we really saw in him, characteristics, traits, examples of the good we saw in him, the good we see in him and appreciate about him and are proud of him. And I found myself wishing that my mom was there. I would have loved to have heard what my mom would have said about my oldest child, her oldest grandchild. She was a very encouraging soul, my mom. She had a quiet and gentle wisdom about her. She would have shared something of great meaning. And it would have, I think, she would have, in her simple way, breathed life into us all. But especially Daniel. Words can do that. A well-spoken word can bring life. A well-spoken word can breathe life into someone. I still have a 16-year-old at home, my daughter Elise, and one of the biggest milestones in our society is the 16th birthday, because when you turn 16, you can start working toward being allowed to drive a car. And we don't let just anybody drive a car. You have to go to the MVA and take a test and log a bunch of hours behind the wheel of a car. And eventually you can get a license, because a car, it's a life and death deal. So we make people go through some hoops before they can get a license if they're going to drive a car. I was thinking this week that there's a force that's more powerful than cars, because it means life or death, not just to the body, but to the soul. And every human being is issued one, and it's our mouth. Wouldn't it be interesting if we required everybody to have a license to operate their mouths, and you had to be tested every couple of years to demonstrate your competence with words? Like if we had a department of motor mouths that would monitor our speech, because we kind of need that, don't we? In the Bible, the writer of the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, is very aware of the power of words. There are probably more Proverbs devoted to human speech than any other slice of human life. An overarching statement in Proverbs 18 says, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. And that's just true, isn't it? With our words, when we're careless, we can do so much damage. We can crush someone's spirit. We can step on somebody's dream. We can fill somebody with resentment. On the other hand, when you say the right word at the right time, somebody who thought they were alone, they realize they're not alone, they're loved. Somebody who was confused receives guidance and direction. Somebody who's ready to give up all of a sudden gets hope. The right words can sometimes give correction to a person who is about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Words really do have the power of life or death. So let's blast through a few proverbs on this Mother's Day that are regarding the tongue, the mouth, and the wisdom and truth behind each one. And as we go through this, maybe do a little self-reflection and ask God, hey God, is there any wisdom here that you want me specifically to sort through in my life? Proverbs chapter 29, verse 20 says this, do you see a man who speaks in haste? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Now, part of why wise people are in no rush to speak is they understand the almost infinite potential for misunderstanding and communication. Because when I'm talking with you, even if my heart is in the right place, even if I want to say the right thing, I need to weigh my words very carefully because there's such a good chance that you won't hear what it is I'm trying to say. It's really an enormous challenge in this way. And the writer of Proverbs says, don't be too quick to let the words fly from your mouth. Kind of pump the brakes. When the subject gets sensitive, wise people pause before they speak. And really wise people will sometimes say a little prayer because God says in the book of James, and James is very influenced by the book of Proverbs. It's a very similar book in the New Testament. James says if anybody lacks wisdom, they should ask God, who generously gives wisdom. There's a great episode in the Bible. It's in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is an Israelite, but he's in exile with his people. And he's serving the king of Babylon. And Nehemiah hears that Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, his beloved city, well, it's in ruins. And Nehemiah is devastated by this. He can't keep the sorrow to himself. And the king sees Nehemiah's sorrow. And Nehemiah is very afraid about this because in those days, it was a capital offense to be sad in front of the king. Kings didn't like to feel bad, and they could kind of get away with this. So if you were sorry in front of them, if you were sad in front of them, they could execute you. So Nehemiah is quite afraid when this happens. And the Bible says in chapter 2, verse 4, it says there that the king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to my God, and I said to my king. That's a phrase that's so striking. I prayed to my God. And in that brief second, in that moment, it literally was true for Nehemiah that life and death were riding on his next words. So he just says this quick prayer, God, help me. Prayed to God, said to the king. So this week when the subject is really sensitive, and it will be sometimes, when you're talking with somebody or you're in conflict with somebody or somebody needs a real important decision from you, or you want to express affection for somebody, or somebody's in a difficult situation, don't speak in haste. Ask for God's help. God, help me know what to say right now. Sometimes the wisdom of God will be, don't say anything at all. Proverbs talks about this. Check it out. Chapter 17, verse 28 says, even a fool is counted wise when he keeps silent and discerning if he holds his tongue. So if you want people to think you're smart this week, the best advice might just be keep quiet. It was Mark Twain who said something similar when he wrote, better to keep your mouth shut and people think you to be a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. David Hubbard was for years the president of Fuller Seminary, and he was a great Old Testament scholar too, and he wrote a commentary on the book of Proverbs. And in this section in his commentary, he writes about what he looks for when he's looking for leaders to be part of his leadership team of that school. And this is what he writes. Do they wait their turn? Do they step on the lines of others? Do they have a need for the last word? Do they try to top everyone else's stories? Do they sound off in their areas of incompetence? Can they say, I don't know? Do they repeat themselves badly or wander aimlessly through their subject matter? People with these and other verbal liabilities do not usually make it to my team. They are not sensitive enough. They are not modest enough. They waste time. They hurt feelings. They shatter morale. Sometimes verbal wisdom involves knowing when I'm invited to speak into a situation and when my involvement is likely to do more harm than good. Building off this, Proverbs 26:17 says, like someone who grabs a stray dog by the ears is someone who rushes into a quarrel not their own. And that's a vivid picture, isn't it? Grabbing a stray dog by the ears. It's not a summa cum laude kind of move. And this was especially true in the ancient world. We think of dogs mostly as pets here in our country. Some of you are probably with your pet right now, your dog watching this with you right now. But in those days, mostly dogs were fairly wild animals, a little bit more like, jackals or something. And to pick up a dog by the ears, well, you wouldn't do that. That'd be a foolish, foolish thing to do. And Proverbs says, Well, we do that all the time. And the idea behind this proverb is that I don't have to go around trying to fix everybody and everything. I don't have to take sides in every situation. I don't have to go around passing judgment every time something's going on. I don't have to jump in, but we do it all the time. And sometimes families or workplaces or schools or teams, communities, churches, they get divided up into camps because they never learn to allow two people to resolve conflict in a helpful way. In the Bible, when the Apostle Paul, he writes to the church at Philippi, that's what's going on between two women named Euodia and Syntyche. There's some conflict between them. And we don't know what it is, but his advice, Paul's advice to the rest of the congregation is to be of a helpful spirit and to be in prayer when two people get into conflict. Now, here's another thought about our words and our speech. Proverbs 27:6 says, "The kisses of an enemy may be profuse, but faithful and true are the wounds of a friend." And this is a phenomenal thought, because when you love somebody, you want your words not just to feel good to them. You want your words to build them up, to build up their character. And throughout Proverbs, you'll see that this gets to the heart of what love really is. That's why there are statements like this. And, Proverbs 25:12 says, "Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is a wise man's rebuke to a listening ear." It's a valuable thing. It's saying it's a precious thing. And one of the questions that maybe you'll face this week is, will I have the courage to say a wise rebuke where it's needed? Because if I love somebody, I want to speak the truth to them. Always in a loving manner, but I want to speak the truth. On the other hand, people who always tell you only what they think you want to hear, they might not be your friends. That's why Proverbs has so many warnings against flattery. For instance, a lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. And Proverbs has a lot to say about deception and the damage that that'll create. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. It may sound pretty good, may feel really good for a moment, but it's really destructive. Do you see how important this is? How much is at stake in our speech and our words and with our mouths? Life and death. Now, a whole other category of speech involves the way we talk about each other. Proverbs 18:8 says, "The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to a man's inmost parts." Proverbs has a lot to say about gossip and how destructive it is, how it can wreak havoc. And this proverb gets to why it's so hard to get rid of, because it feeds something deep inside of us. Something dark inside of me kind of feels good at passing judgment on another person. Makes me feel a little superior to them. Words of a gossip are like choice morsels. Not too long ago, I had a voicemail from somebody, a friend of mine. They called me and it went to my voicemail and they left a message for me. But unbeknownst to them, they ended up not hanging up the phone after they left their message. They didn't end the call. It continued recording them, and it ended up recording their conversation they had with somebody else who was there with them. And they ended up being quite critical of me about some decisions I've made. And it might sound a little strange, but when I look back on that, I'm kind of glad in some ways, grateful that those words got recorded, because it got me thinking that not just that person's words, but all our words matter, and we all have this issue to wrestle through. I have said words like this person said about me, and much darker than those, dozens of times, hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so I just want to say a word about us as a church. And I say this to somebody who wrestles with their words as much as anybody. There's no verbal sin in this world that I'm not capable of. And you too. Gossip and careless words and passing on unfounded rumors and saying things that may be even factually accurate, but to the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong way with the wrong spirit, they just do so much damage. They kill. Words can end friendships and splinter families and shatter reputations and split churches. So let's ask God to help us all aim higher. And maybe a good test to use with this would be, hey, would it be okay if I'm talking about somebody who's not here? Would it be okay with me if that person was listening to these words? If these words were being recorded on their voicemail for them to hear? That's a pretty good test. And let me just say this. If you find you wrestle with talking about people in unhealthy ways and you have a hard time with that, because it can get addictive over time. It's important to understand the problem isn't just the words that I'm saying. It's the condition of my heart. See, the problem that day that person left that voicemail on my phone, it wasn't just that the recording was still going and the words got recorded. The problem was really the condition of someone's heart. It's an interesting thing. 7 times in the book of Proverbs, the writer connects the heart to the mouth. And this is summarized perfectly by Jesus when he said in Matthew 12, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. See, we try to let ourselves off the hook all the time with this. We'll say, oh, I didn't mean to say that, or that's not who I really am. But not according to Jesus. I mean, according to Jesus and the Proverbs, if I've got a mouth problem, I've got a heart problem. That's the real issue. Because whatever is going on inside my heart, over time, Jesus understood. He had such insight into the human condition. Whatever's going on in my heart, eventually, over time, is going to come out of my mouth. And I can work really hard by willpower, on my mouth. But if my heart doesn't change, inevitably, my mouth is going to lead. Another piece of general wisdom for our church on this subject comes from Proverbs 15. Listen to this. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a fool uses email. Oh, wait a minute. I read that wrong. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but an idiot sends a text. I messed it up again. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a blockhead posts on social media. Now, wait a minute. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a nitwit goes to the comment section. Now, Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, let's talk about this because this is one of the most toxic areas our culture faces right now. And this is one area where Christians, followers of Jesus, are called to and commanded to be distinct and countercultural. The first line there of this proverb, a soft answer. Giving a soft answer doesn't mean I have to agree with somebody just because they might get mad. It's not that at all. We need to be truth tellers. That's something for a lot of us we need to work on, to have the courage to be truth tellers. But what this proverb is, it's an observation that when another person gets really amped up, they're shouting or name calling or using emotionally loaded language, my reflexive response is to get just as amped up, to talk just as loud as they do and name call or use loaded language too. And this goes on in our world all the time. We see this all the time on the road. I mean, you could see it in spades there. Somebody gets amped up and somebody else gets amped up and it just keeps escalating. It happens so often we've given it a name. Anybody ever heard of road rage? Last weekend when my wife Melanie and I were traveling to Tennessee, we were on Interstate 81. And 81 is one of the most heavily trafficked interstate for 18-wheelers. So it happens on certain stretches of 81 because it'll only be 2 lanes for so long. So many of the trucks will be in the right lane. And if you're trying to move along, you'll be in the left lane, but it gets jammed up too. Either someone gets in the left lane and they're not moving along like they should, or these big rigs, they get over to pass another rig and it can sometimes slow the left lane up. Well, Melanie and I were in the left lane trying to make some good time, and we got behind a Jeep. But it was a real souped up Jeep, big tires and all that, jacked up really high. And it had these special mufflers attached to it. They were huge. They were coming out the back of that Jeep there. It was like Gravedigger was going south on I-81 in front of us. And I feel compelled to tell you that he had a West Virginia license plate, for what that's worth. But every time Mountaineer Man would hit the gas and gun it in his souped up Jeep, it made the loudest sound, such that all the world could hear with these big old specially add-on mufflers there. It was like somebody who was running a weed eater in our back seat. And it seemed like we were behind him for most of the trip. And sure enough, he got amped up on the road at the other cars that were trying to pass on the right. And you know how this works too. Everybody's jammed up on the left, moving faster than the right lane, but somebody back there, way back in the back, will see an opening on the right, and they think they're going to slip in and pass all these folks in the left lane before they come up to another truck. But it's jammed up. Nobody's going anywhere in the left lane. We're all at the mercy of Interstate 81. So anytime somebody starts to pass on the right of old Gravedigger in front of me, he'd gun it, speed up real quick. His mufflers would do their thing, and he'd close that little window in between him and the car in front of him such that this ambitious opportunity guy would get stuck and eventually have to take his place back where he came from. And this went on for miles and miles. And I found myself starting to do the same thing. I mean, for a while, folks would try to pass old Gravedigger, but he'd floor it. They'd zip over in front of me. But I eventually got in the act. I was like, you're not getting in front of me, man. You're not getting in front of Gravedigger, and you're not going to get in front of me either, buddy. I don't have the fancy mufflers, but as far as I'm concerned, head to the back of the line and pay your dues with the rest of humanity. I just got all amped up. We get this, right? Someone gets all amped up with their words, and our reflexive response is to get all amped up too. So the observation here as a general rule, back to our words, as a general rule, the more I see the other person getting out of control, the more important it is that I need to de-escalate the rage factor so that the conversation can stay rational. I still have to speak the truth, but watch that reflexive tendency to just escalate the rage. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And let me say a word about email, Facebook, social media, texting, all that. There's something about the anonymity of all that leads people to a level of hostility or sarcasm that they would never engage in if they were sitting across from the other person, looking at the other person face to face. So can we just kind of make a covenant together? No hostile emails, no hostile posts or tweets or texts. Can we just kind of covenant together as a church to have none of that? And I don't mean that particularly directed towards me. I just mean for all of us as a community, as a church body. The more sensitive the subject is, take the time. Just take the time. I know how quick and easy it is to simply touch a button, but take the time to look at somebody face to face. Our church will be so much healthier that way. All right, now this has been about how they have the power of life or death, but mostly we've been talking about death, the hard side of that, the death side of that. Let's kind of flip the script for a minute and just use the rest of our time to talk about the life side of words, the power of God-anointed words. Proverbs 25:11 puts it like this: a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Gold and silver, two of the most precious things in that society. That's how valuable the right kinds of words are. The right word at the right time to the right person with the right spirit. Look out. The writer of Proverbs says, now we're cooking, man. And this isn't rocket science here. If you've ever been around someone that has conditioned themselves to say the right word at the right time, somebody who's been conscious of this, sought to discipline themselves with this, looked for opportunities for this, oh my goodness, it's just the best. Sometimes people with the spiritual gift of encouragement are able to do this, and it's like watching an artist at work. To say the right thing with a compliment or a thank you or a word of hope from the Bible. I know folks who say words with a smile and they put an arm around you, and it could just bring life to somebody so quickly. It's like watching somebody pump air into tires that have gotten a little deflated. People kind of sit up a little straighter, walk a little taller. This week, CCC, you're going to run into some deflated tires. And you can get impatient if you want to. You can even get judgmental if you want to. Or you could pause and say, God, help me breathe a little life into them. And some of you have such gifts for doing this. The writer of Proverbs says there's nothing like the right word at the right time to the right person. Apples of gold in settings of silver. Another way to think about this, Proverbs 15:4 says, the tongue that brings healing is a tree of life. A tree of life. That little phrase, tree of life, it's a very rich phrase in the Bible. The tree of life was what was present in the Garden of Eden, in the very beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis. It was a gift of God to give life to Adam and Eve. And then the tree of life, it'll also show up again in the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. And that thought, it's transformed by Jesus, who went to the tree on Calvary, and what was intended as a tree of death became a tree of life for all of us. It's God's gift to the world. And the writer of Proverbs says, the tongue that brings healing, it's God's gift. It's a tree of life. Let me tell you about one such tongue that brought life. It's about a man named Johnny. Kim Blanchard and Barbara Glanz wrote about him. Barbara was a corporate consultant and a speaker, and she was talking one time to a bunch of frontline workers, like 3,000 frontline workers for a supermarket chain, like truck drivers and cashiers and stockers. And she was talking about the power of words. And she talked about how every interaction they would have with another person, it's a chance to create a memory, a chance to bless somebody's life, a chance to speak a word of healing, apples of gold. And she told some stories about how that could happen. She did her talk there, and then she went home. And this is what Barbara writes. About a month later, I got a call from a frontline customer contact person, a 19-year-old bagger named Johnny. The caller, who proudly informed me that he had Down syndrome, told me this story. He said, Barbara, I liked what you talked about, but I didn't think I could do anything special for our customers. After all, I'm just a bagger. And then he had an idea. He decided every night when he came home from work, he would find a really good thought for the day, like for the next day. And if he couldn't find one someplace, he'd just kind of make one up. And then every night, he and his dad would sit down by the computer, and his dad would help him enter the saying several times on a page. And then Johnny would sit there and print off 50 pages of that. And then he'd take a pair of scissors and cut off 300 copies. And then he'd sign his name to every one of those. And then the next day, he'd put the stack of them next to him while he worked. And every time he finished bagging somebody's groceries, he'd put his saying on top of that last bag. And then he'd stop and he'd look at the person, look him right in the eye, and he'd say, I put a great saying in your bag. I hope it helps you have a good day. Thanks for coming in. That was Johnny the bagger. A month later, Barbara got a call from the store manager who said, Barbara, you won't believe what's happened here. I was making my rounds. When I got to the cashier lines, the line at Johnny's checkout was 3 times longer than anybody else's. Went all the way down the frozen food aisle. So he said he got on the loudspeaker to get more checkout lines open, but they couldn't get any of the customers to move out of Johnny's line. They all said, hey, that's okay. We'll wait. We want to be in Johnny's line. One woman, she came up to him. She grabbed his hand and she said, I used to shop in your store once a week, but now I come in every time because I want to see Johnny. I want to get Johnny's thought for the day. A few months later, the manager called Barbara back and said, hey, Barbara, you're not going to believe this. Johnny's transforming our store. He's changed the entire culture of our store. When the floral department has a broken flower or an unused corsage, they used to just throw it away. But now they go into the aisles and they find an elderly person or a little kid and they pin it on them. The guys who take care of our shopping carts, he said, are working on wheels that actually work. Imagine that. The whole culture of the store has changed. Do you know who the most important person in that store was? It was Johnny the bagger. He wasn't at the top of the organizational chart. He for sure wasn't making the most money. But you can bet your bottom dollar that he was the most important person in that store. A workplace, a grocery store. A whole community really was changed because one person, one bagger, decided to use his words to bring apples of gold in a setting of silver. He chose to use his words to bring life. And I'm telling you, if it can happen in a grocery store, it can happen anywhere. It can happen in a family, it can happen on a team, it can happen in a workplace, it can happen in a school, it can happen in a church. By the way, do you know who the most important person is in this church, in CCC? Well, in one sense, it's you. This is our great challenge, gang. Who's going to carry the mantle for this? Whose responsibility is this? The critical words, the harsh words, they're easy. Everybody likes to complain. What if we were a group of people who were committed to crafting our words and using our words in such a way that brought life to whatever setting we're in, where we take up that mantle? What a cool church this place would be. What would it look like for you to be the most encouraging person in whatever room you walked into? Because anybody can be a Johnny. What he did wasn't slick or complicated. It didn't get written down on a whiteboard someplace or planned in a strategic planning meeting. He was just a bagger, but he was expressing his heart. And you and I can do that. Whatever your title is, wherever you work, wherever you live, wherever you go to school, whatever team you're on, that can happen. This place too, it can be a group of people just like Johnny. You can let people know that they matter, that their lives matter, because I'll tell you a little secret about all the people that you know and see. No matter how well put together they seem, everybody needs healing. And your words can bring healing to them. People can find out that God loves them and that they are so treasured by Him, and they can be invited to become a part of this place. People who don't know Jesus right now can come to know Him, and He can change everything. Your tongue has the power of life or death. A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Let's pray together. Father, would you heal our hearts and give us healing words that flow from our mouths? Give us discernment, God, to speak life. Through the power of Jesus, we pray. Amen.